Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway. It's not every day we have a former president of Bolivia in London, let alone on board the Sputnik. That we do have today is because the current president, Evo Morales, has asked him to take to the road and to international public opinion to build support for Bolivia's case in their ongoing dispute with Chile. The Chilean government, until recently, was involved in a similar dispute with Argentina. Well, any case that Evo Morales wants to raise is certainly one to which I want to listen, and I hope you do too. So it's a pleasure to welcome His Excellency Carlos Mesa, former President of Bolivia. Your Excellency, welcome to the Sputnik. Begin, please, by telling us, what is the dispute between Bolivia and Chile? How long has this dispute been running, and how serious is it?
Thank you for your invitation. For me, it is a privilege to be here. This problem started in 1879. In that year, Chile invaded Bolivia. This was a unilateral aggression that ended up in a war that Bolivia didn't want, after which Chile occupied completely the sea axis of Bolivia, 400 kilometers of coast. 24 years later, we signed a treaty, and according to this treaty, Bolivia would cede the whole of this lost territory in exchange for an economical compensation. 20 years later, in 1920, Chile offered Bolivia, because this that was done many times between 1920 and 1983. 7 times Chile pledged this access, and Chile has not complied. And that's why Bolivia has decided to take Chile to the International Court of Justice. We have lodged a complaint against Chile, and all we are asking is that the court states that Chile has to negotiate with Bolivia in order to give them a sovereign access. This duty comes from previous treaties.
So you are landlocked because your neighbor stole 400 kilometers of your seafront. That's not a very neighborly thing to do. One can understand these things in the 19th century, but in the 21st century, it doesn't seem much for you to ask for this historic wrong to be righted.
As you have said, we think that something as horrible as this war and occupation, it really is abominable. In those days, it was the winner take it all. And I think this can be now repaired in the 21st century. All we're asking is a simple thing. We are not asking them for the 400 kilometers of coast. We are simply asking for a reasonable sovereign access to the coast, acceptable to Chile and acceptable to us. And I agree with you that we can, in the 21st century, resolve this problem, this long outstanding problem, which is actually going against integration in the continent.
The people who live there, do they regard themselves as Bolivian, or has Chile transported people from its country to yours?
Han pasado ya muchos años, ha pasado más
It's
de un
been
siglo
many
desde
years,
que
it's been
ocurrió
over a
ese terrible
century since
episodio
this
en
horrible
Bolivia,
thing
y hoy día
happened,
la
and
totalidad de la población
today
que vive
the
en
whole
territorio
of the
que fue
population that
originalmente
lives
boliviano
in that
es
originally
chilena y se
Bolivian
considera
territory is
Pero
Chilean, and they
nosotros
consider
no
themselves
queremos
to be
generar
Chilean.
ninguna dificultad
However, we
de
do not
identidad,
want to
ni está
generate
en
any
nuestro
identity
interés el
problem.
plantear un cambio
We
de
do not want to
nacionalidad. Lo
people
que
to
nosotros
change
creemos es que
nationalities.
es posible un
What we
espacio
think
geográfico,
is
una
that we
transferencia de
have the
territorio que
right
pudiera
to get
generar,
some territory
obviamente, una respuesta
so
razonable de Chile.
we
Pero
could get a
nuestra
reasonable answer from
demanda
Chile.
en este momento
Our claim
no es
at the moment
específicamente para una transferencia de
is not
territorio
for
de
a
Chile a Bolivia.
territorial
Nuestra
transfer.
demanda es algo más simple que
Our
eso.
claim
Es
is a lot
que la
simpler.
Corte le diga a Chile,
What we
siéntense a
simply
negociar con
want
Bolivia
is that
para
the
otorgarles una salida
Court
al
of
mar, y que
Justice
como producto de esa
asks Chile to
negociación,
negotiate with
ambos
us,
países de
and that
mutuo acuerdo
after
encontremos una
negotiating
solución
we come to
razonable
a
tanto para
common
Bolivia como
accord
para
which
Chile.
is acceptable
Hoy
to
día
both
Bolivia
parties.
no le pide a la Corte
Bolivia
una
is not
transferencia de
asking the
territorio.
court
Hoy día Bolivia
to
le pide
get
a la
a
Corte
chunk of
que le
land.
diga a Chile,
All we are asking
siéntese a
is
negociar
for the
con
court
Bolivia. Es decir,
to
lo
ask
básico
Chile to
en una
start
solución
negotiating
que
with
busca
Bolivia. I think it's a
pacíficamente
basic
resolver
start
interveniente.
for a negotiation.
You mentioned the phrase sovereign access. Explain, please, what you mean by that. Presumably, you do have access, though commercial, to the sea by the whim of the Chilean authorities. By sovereign access, do you mean a corridor that you would effectively control and which could not be blocked to you and could not be charged for financially?
La pregunta es muy pertinente. En efecto,
This is a very important
como parte
question.
del tratado de
As part of the
1904,
treaty
Bolivia
of the
tiene derecho de
1904
libre tránsito
treaty,
por un par de
Bolivia
puertos
has
chilenos.
the right of free
Y el
transit
concepto
through some
es que
Chilean ports.
un acceso soberano
Now, when
al
we
mar
talk about a sovereign
implica
access,
la posibilidad de que Bolivia
we
pueda
are implying
controlar
the fact that
todo su
Bolivia
comercio
could
exterior
control
directamente
its
sobre un territorio que sea
external
boliviano.
trade. You know, Bolivia exports natural gas. If we wanted to export gas over the oceans, we would need a plant to process it. Nowadays, we cannot do it without the authorization of Chile and without asking Chile for some land to build this plant. For that, we need to comply with Chilean law. Of course, that's not the same as if we had our own port. If we had our sovereign access, then we would be able to go forward with a lot of initiatives like this, following our needs and following our strategies. That is the main difference between a free transit that we have now and a sovereign access.
What level of tension has this dispute produced in relations between the two countries?
Como usted comprenderá, no es
As you
fácil
will understand,
llevar adelante una relación fluida.
it's not very easy to have a fluid relationships when we have, a litigious process. We actually do not have diplomatic relations because Bolivia considers that until we do not get a sovereign access, we cannot have a fluid relationship with Chile. However, our intention is not antagonistic, because in a way, being in the Court of Justice is just to solve these issues pacifically. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, Chile and Peru had an issue in The Hague that didn't impinge on their diplomatic relations. However, the Chilean government has a very harsh attitude towards Bolivia, unlike that to Peru, because they also had an issue with them.
Well, the common denominator here is Chile, because I have been a very small part of Chile's dispute with Argentina. I'm now talking to you about Chile's dispute with Bolivia, and you rightly draw attention to Chile's dispute with Peru. What is it about Chile that puts them always in the courts and always in antagonism with their neighbors? because this has been the case under military dictatorship, under democratic governments of the center-left and democratic governments of the center-right. So is it something Chilean about this?
Coincido con usted.
I agree with you. If we analyze Chile's international relations, they only have 3 neighbors, and we see that in the last half a century they have had problems with Peru, with Argentina, and now with Bolivia. So yeah, we do think there is something that doesn't quite work in Chile's stance towards their neighbors. We think Chile has an attitude whereby they don't accept dialogue as a solution to conflicts. In a way, they are entrenched in a very proud position. And for us, that's not a problem. I would just like to say one thing. The Chilean government says that when Bolivia asks for a sovereign access, that we are actually putting into doubt a treaty. So doing, they say that we are actually putting into risk all the other treaties. We have always respected the treaty. We are not basing our claim in the 1904 treaty because we know that the international order is based in border treaties. What we are asking is for Chile to make good on their commitments since, and so be able to negotiate a sovereign access.
Well, we have only a minute left. Are you confident that you can win this dispute internationally? And if not, what can you do?
Bolivia no tiene un plan B porque está
Bolivia doesn't
absolutamente
have a B
convencida
plan
de que
because we are convinced that our legal arguments are solid, that we have a very good, peaceful approach, and we are asking the court to ask Chile to negotiate with Bolivia so we can talk about a sovereign access. So we are optimistic that we are going to get going along. I think the court will eventually declare itself competent to decide that Chile has to negotiate with Bolivia.
Well, good luck in New York at the United Nations, and good luck in your travels. Many of our viewers of Sputnik are big admirers of President Evo Morales. Please convey to him our very best fraternal greetings. And President Mesa, thanks very much indeed for coming on board the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, Gayatri will be back in her normal place, and he's top of the popes, formerly of the parish of Argentina, now Pope Francis in Rome, and he's certainly making everyone sit up and take notice. We're talking to his representative, Father Zampino, next. Don't miss it. Welcome back to Sputnik with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri. Imagine if the Pope was one of us, to paraphrase Joan Osborne. Well, we finally got one, eschewing everything from red slippers to luxury living and once prevailing conservative orthodoxies.
The latest to be felled in the thicket of political orthodoxies was the Pope's pronouncements on man-made environmental degradation, which marked him out from the deniers and puts clear holy water between the pontiff and the corporate despoilers. Joining us now to discuss this superstar Pope and his recent homecoming tour is Father from the aforementioned parish of Argentina. Father, welcome. Let's start, if we can, with the environmental question, which has caused a lot of trouble, particularly in the United States, where climate change denial is rife, and even sometimes amongst Catholics. And it's certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons. You were a part of the working group that produced the Pope's recent pronouncement. Tell us, please, what the Pope's findings were and why you think they've proved so controversial.
Thank you, George. Well, first, I was not part of the Pope's advisors, just to clarify, but we were part of, as a Catholic agency here in the UK, we were part of spreading the good news of the Pope's encyclical. There is a letter written to every single person in the world, not just to Catholics. And the reason is because we inhabit this land, this planet, and the problem of climate change is affecting everyone. The reason it has caused controversy is because the Pope talks against the ideology of the deniers. The ideology of the deniers, of climate change deniers, is either based on the god of Mammon, which is the god of money, and the god of the free market, or either the god of political power. So in the name of money or in the name of power, you just ignored what's happening around the world. And why is that? Because as a Catholic agency working in poor countries, we are witnessing that climate change is already affecting the very poor. It's not that this will affect the poor in 20 years' time. It's already happening. An entire family in Sierra Leone, which we are working with CAFOD, pollutes less than any of us here in London. Yeah. So this is the injustice, you see, of climate change. I am polluting the world, but I'm still benefiting from this model of development. Whereas people in Sierra Leone, in Nicaragua, in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, they are not contributing to the climate change problem, but they are being affected the most. So what the Pope is raising the question, the Pope is not necessarily, as some politicians in the US said, anti-capitalist or anti-anything. He's an anti-ideologist. He's saying, open our eyes, for goodness sake. This is a problem not just of the poor, they are being affected the most, but it's a problem that affected all of us, that is affecting all of us. Last year in the UK we have a great flood, but it wasn't the end of the day because we have resources to cope with the effects of climate change. In California as well, the droughts in California are terrible, but they have resources to cope. But when this is happening in the south, the people, they just starve and die. And the Pope is calling us, well, let's open our eyes and accept this reality. What we are witnessing is what already as scientists, or the best science that we have, is accepting. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, alongside the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the Royal Academy of Sciences, and the majority of research universities in the world, they have agreed that this problem is not just caused by natural natural causes. Is caused by human beings' activities, particularly the industrialization in the West. So this is why the ones who are whose vested interests will be affected if we work against climate change are raising voices against the Pope.
The Pope is Jesus's vicar on earth, and this is the equivalent of Jesus going into the temple and kicking over the money lenders' tables, isn't it? The Pope has a duty to stand up for justice, and the situation you describe is the antithesis of justice. Whether you want to call it anti-capitalism, I prefer to, you might not. It's certainly a clear signal from the Church that people come first. People come before money. People come before power. Now, this brings me to a wider discussion on this phenomenon, this incredible Pope, the top of the popes, as I put it, who has re-energized a church that looked to be on its backside, frankly, with scandal after scandal and a leadership that didn't seem to rise to the challenges. Is it because he's Argentinian, I ask you, as a fellow Argentinian, or what is it that's special about Francis?
Yes, what is special is he has that he's a person that is listening and learning all the time. But because he's a member of the hierarchy of the church, that is pretty much outstanding, that a leader, any political leader, economic leader or church leader, is in an ongoing process of learning. And we believe that we learn from what God tells us through the Holy Spirit, through the people, particularly through the poor. And this is what's special. I remember he once gave us a talk when I was a seminarian, and he said, you priests, you will never be poor, because you will always have shelter, you will always have food, you will always have work. So you have to try to see the needs of the poor every single day. And I think the Pope was talking, well, then was the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, but he was talking to himself. This is what he tries to do, to see the reality through the eyes of the poor. But because that makes a difference. You mentioned economics. He's not against economy, but he's against an economic system that doesn't have people on the center.
Exactly.
Because he's against a conception of power that doesn't serve, but wants to control people. And that's why I'm saying he's against ideologies. And what makes it special is that also another thing is that he does what he talks. So he's very compelling and consistent, which is fabulous for a world leader nowadays. We know that many world leaders, and you know it very well, they have to respond to the interests that put them in a position of power, unfortunately. Well, the Pope feels free about that, because he doesn't have to respond to any particular power, even within the church. So he's free to try to spread what we say, the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of love and justice in the world. And he spoke freely, by being consistent also in the way he lives. For example, you know that he doesn't live in the palace of the Vatican, although he could, but he prefers to live in a guest house. And actually, it's very, very simple and small. So he loves to be in touch with the people and to talk to the people and to listen. So that's why from time to time, he just has lunch with the employees of the Vatican. Can you imagine the faces of the employees the first time he appeared with his tray? I said, are you sitting here? Yeah, why not? I'm the Pope. So I think that makes him very, very special. He's a person who likes to be close to the people and who likes to see the reality through the eyes of the poor every day. He works hard for that. It's not natural. And I think it's not natural for us. And that's why he's calling the politicians, the UN, the politicians all around the world, and the economic the leaders to try to do the same. Do what you do in a good way, trying to serve people and to serve all, not just your own interests.
Since his papacy, he has recently returned to the homeland, home continent rather. How do you revise that tour?
Well, the tour to Latin America is quite important for Francis as a pope and as a person, and for the people there. For Francis as a pope, because I think he has recovered this sense of love and contact with people. I think he missed to be close to people, and you can see from the photos and the videos how much he loves being in contact with them, particularly with the ones who are considered the least of society, with indigenous people.
Yeah, he was drinking cocoa leaf with them.
Exactly, and in his latest encyclical Laudato Si, he talks about the importance of indigenous people. How can they contribute to the world with their wisdom, with their solidarity, and with their love for Mother Earth? And for the people in Latin America, can you imagine that a pope visits them, a Latin American pope, the first one in history, and talks not to the hierarchy, but talks to them, and talks how important is the participation in society, how important is to work for justice and for intergenerational justice, how important is to work for the care of our creation, and how important are their contributions to our globalization. That shouldn't be a globalization of indifference, but a globalization of solidarity and proper wealth. And that's why the visit of Latin America is kind of preparing the Pope's visit to the General Assembly of the United Nations next September, because there the Pope will talk up to the representatives of all nations, but on behalf of all the people.
Strengthened by. God bless His Holiness the Pope Francis. Thank you very much, Father Zampini.
Thank you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
We asked, what's so hot about the superstar Pope as he now takes on the fight to the climate wreckers? Sam Thompson answers, he's upsetting a lot of vested interest. Is it because he does not think he will be around long, or vice versa? On a brighter note, Akil Ali says, whatever it is, but Pontifex is by far the coolest handle name on Twitter.
It is, and he's definitely the coolest as well as the hottest of all the popes. Top of the popes.
And that's all that we've got for this day.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can stay in touch with us on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or like us on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. Goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.